Welcome to our November 3rd regular Planning and Zoning Board meeting. We welcome all of you on the telephone and watching on television. Thank you. Nadia, can you please conduct a roll call?
Yeah. Don Black?
Here.
Pat Darcy?
Here.
Raymond Layton?
Here.
Ann Shout?
Here.
Margie Dunn?
Here.
Travis Oakley?
Here.
Sonny Aluso?
Here.
We have a quorum.
We have a quorum. The first item on the new business is a Sydes Construction Inc. Thomas Engineering is requesting a final subdivision plan for approval for the Southwind Phase 2 Section A at Bluewater Rise, a planned unit development, a proposed 28-lot planned unit development. This section of the multi-phase development is located on a combined 17.49 approximate acres in the R8 residential district. The site is located to the north of County Line Road and is located in Ward 3. Can we have staff review, please?
Yep. Okay. So as you said, this is final plan consideration of Southwind Phase 2 Section A at Bluewater Rise, and it's a planned unit development. The applicant is Sydes Construction Inc. and Thomas Engineering, and the project name, as I said, is Southwind Phase 2 Section A. The zoning is R8 and it's 17.49 acres approximately. So this planned unit development received preliminary subdivision approval back in February of 2017. The average lot size is 20,685 square feet. The total length of streets is 2,039 linear feet. And the total common area is about 1 acre, but just remember that's for this particular section, not the whole development. And the utilities will be provided by the City of New Bern. Here is where the site is located. And here are the plans. Staff is recommending that approval of this subdivision as it received preliminary subdivision approval in 2017. The plan finds it meets all the requirements of section 15-79 of the Land Use Ordinance of the City of New Bern, and we are recommending approval contingent upon the receipt of a performance bond accepted by the city attorney. And just to update you all, that was actually just sent over to accounting yesterday, and it has been approved by Public Works and the Water Department. And there we have it.
Now, my understanding is the bond is approved, so it's ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any questions from this board to staff? Having heard none, I see that the representative for the applicant is here. John, do you wish to say anything to us?
No, but I will answer questions if any come up.
Okay. And now, just to keep this all legal, is there any members of the public that wish to address this development in favor of the development? Having heard none, are there any members of the community who wish to address this plan against the development? Having heard none, I'd like to direct it back to the board. Are there any questions about this development at all? Having heard none, now this is a final approval. The zoning board makes the approval. This does not go before the Board of Aldermen for approval. At this point, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the item 2A on the agenda. Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion. Is the motion seconded?
Second.
We have a motion and seconded. All those, do we have to do a roll call?
Yes, please.
Okay. Can you conduct a roll call, please?
Don Black?
Yes.
Pat Darcy?
Yes.
Raymond Layton?
Yes.
Ann Shout?
Yes.
Margie Dunn,
Yes.
Travis Oakley,
Yes.
Sunny Aluzo.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Motion passes unanimously. Now we go on to section 2B, which is the consideration of a request to review the height regulations in zoning R6 zoning district, residential and commercial waterfront overlay district, and Riverside mixed-use overlay district from the Board of Aldermen board member comments. Staff, review please of this.
Thank you. For those of you on the phone, Nadia did send out the PowerPoint that we'll be going over. It's important that we follow along. This board has been tasked by the Board of Aldermen to make some policy recommendations as it pertains to some changes to some of the height regulations in the city and some overlay language. There's some confusion that we'll get into that later on. But tonight, really, I'm not asking for any policy recommendations or anything. Height in the city of New Bern can be...
Don, can you ask him to get closer to the speaker?
What do they got here?
Oh, those are probably...
I don't think they're working.
Did it die?
Hold on, Sonny.
Green.
Yeah, they're supposed to
Thank
be.
you.
Someone probably unplugged them. All right, I'll come closer to you, Sonny.
People are gonna talk.
What did he say?
People gonna talk.
Yeah.
You're getting closer to him.
Can you hear me now?
Press and hold the button, now.
Yes, thank you.
All right. So what we're going to do tonight is really just go over the rules and get a good understanding of what our policy says, you know, the overlays, what they are, what they do, and really just understand how we go about measuring height. If you have any questions, please ask. This is the time for understanding. We're not going to get into any recommendations tonight. It would be impossible to do that. I'll do my best here. This is neat. All right. So in general, 15189 deals with building heights across the city as a whole. So as our most broad policy language as it pertains to height. And in general, we measure it two different ways. Generally across the top before you get into more detailed type overlays where we do it a little differently. So you'll see that we measure height when you're not in the floodplain and you're outside of an overlay, which is 95% of the city. We measure just from finished grade and we go up from there. So that's what that first section is, the highest point of the building. Then it doesn't include any of the extra stuff on top. Unless you're in a special flood hazard area, which is a flood zone. Okay? When you're in the flood zone, we measure from what we call the regulatory flood protection elevation. That is the flood height, base flood elevation, plus our 2 feet of freeboard that the city of New Bern requires that all structures have their finished floor 2 feet above the flood zone level, whatever that is. So if you're in a flood zone and your base flood elevation is 10, your first floor, your finished floor of your structure is going to start at 12 feet.
And that's to allow for mechanicals and whatnot?
That's just the
Water
pass.
It really is just a safety precaution for extra flood.
Just a freeboard.
It's freeboard is what it's called, that's correct. Most places do 1 foot, okay? New Bern's a little unique in that we do 2. Some places do 3, but we just do it 2. So generally speaking, we do it 2 different ways. Everywhere in the city, besides the downtown area where it gets a little funky. If anyone has any questions, please ask. And again, we're measuring to the highest point of the structure, not to include chimneys and other rooftop appurtenances, which is a good architect term. So this is kind of just, you know, the two examples. So what we have on the left is just your normal house, somewhere in Taberna, finished grade, maximum height. On the right-hand side, you may be in an area in a flood zone, you know, somewhere in Duffyfield. So you'll see here, we have a flood zone line here, which establishes another line, probably should have zoomed in a little more, which would be your base flood, which is this line, and then we have the 2-foot of freeboard, which gets us right to the addressed front door. So this is how, and then you would measure from that point up to the highest point of the roof. So if it had these little, I don't know what you would call those.
Parapet.
What'd you call that?
Parapet.
That's a hell of a parapet. You would measure all the way up to the top. So it gives us an envelope to work in. So recently, Federal Flood Insurance Program updated their flood maps. You'll see in the blue is existing 100-year flood zone as of before June of this year. June of this year, the map magically changed to include all these red areas. So now we have additional areas in the floodplain that weren't in the floodplain. And that happens all over the city. So we'll be changing in an area like this. 2 years ago, we would have used our way to measure height would have been that first way, finished floor plus 44 feet. Not plus 44 feet, but to the highest point of the structure. Again, depending on the zoning, that gives you how much height you have. So if it's R6, what's that, 50 feet? I think that's in our slide later, so it would be a 50-foot house. But now they'll be required to measure their height differently using the flood elevation plus 2 feet of freeboard. That's where you start measuring your height. And again, in our downtown area, so this is along the Trent, it's Palace Point Commons, Palace. In this area, you'll see that they changed 2 feet. We got 2 feet of extra flood plain in these areas. So it went typically from 8, so now we're at 10. So we've essentially, any way you look at it, you either gained 2 feet of flood or lost 2 feet of building in some cases. So in our commercial, in our waterfront overlay districts, which I have a map of later on that we'll show, it has, you know, gone from, again, that range from 7 to 8 to 9 to 10 in some areas of additional flood elevations that we have to deal with, which is very important in the overlays because those establish maximum heights. So if you think about having a building envelope where you start at the bottom and go to the top, and you squeeze 2 feet off the bottom, but you don't change the top, it has, you're affecting the overall height of the structure that can be built. Compresses it, correct. Let's talk about that a little more later. We have another overlay district called the Riverstation Mixed Use Overlay District. It's that area along the Neuse. If anyone remembers the silos that got blown up, and it's a big open area. It's that general vicinity and heads down to the terminus of, actually a little stub of Queen Street is in that also. I can't get my bearings here to see that, but maybe it's right here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
That's Queen's Point right there.
Yeah, so it comes down right to about here and goes up to the tracks. So this is just kind of an example of the change. So we have our regulatory flood protection elevation, which is that base flood plus 2 feet of freeboard, which gives us that 10 feet of elevation where you need to start your structure. Here's a good map, kind of shows everything, all the overlays that we're talking about, and gets kind of into the issue that we need to talk about later on. So we have the Riverstation overlay, which is red, and it goes down to here. This is red dashed line, and the solid line along the Neuse is the Riverstation overlay here. This yellow line is one of our locally designated historic districts. And it heads down this journey here. So we have overlap here. This black line is one of our hype overlay districts called the residential, what's the official term for it?
Residential
Waterfront overlay. Yeah, so this is our residential waterfront overlay. Generally cuts down the middle of East Front and goes to the water. So one side is in it, one side is not. So we have a lot of things overlapping in this vicinity right here, which has kind of caused us to come here today. So we have a waterfront overlay district. We have a Riverstation mixed-use district, and to a lesser extent, dealing with height, we have the historic district, which does kind of affect some of the built product as it looks in here. And here's our overlay districts.
A historic district will have some impact because it has massing requirements.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
So here's what the overlay districts are. So here's residential along the Noose, and then we have a different one that starts from East Front and goes along the Trent all the way over to essentially First. Different set of regulations, different methodology for measuring height for commercial and residential. So we'll go back and talk about residential waterfront overlay district, which is this area here. We did leave out something pretty important on this slide, so I'm going to make sure that. So for structures within there, no building shall exceed 44 feet of height. From mean sea level to the highest point of the building. So for residential waterfront overlay, you're not concerned with flood elevation, base flood elevation. You're concerned with a static mean sea level that goes all the way up to 44 feet.
Which, I mean, potentially is going to take 10 to 12 feet out of your,
because now you have construction
now
standards.
if you were in an area, or if you were in an R6 zone, for instance, or in the residential zone, and it's in this overlay district, you had 44 feet to work with. Now you're likely in a AE flood zone with a base flood elevation plus a freeboard requirement. So
Correct.
you've essentially lost the first story of buildability.
Quite possible. Yeah. So if you imagine, so this gives us an envelope to work in from mean sea level to measure height. But when you go back to our regulatory flood elevation level, which was established based on base flood information, so you're still working in the same mean sea level to 44-foot box, and you had base flood elevation plus 2 feet of freeboard. Well, we've increased the base flood elevation by 2-3 feet in some places, so we're losing building.
Or in some cases, well, maybe not in the overlay district.
Yeah.
In some cases, we may not have been in the flood zone, but I think in the overlay, we probably were always in the flood zone in some form.
Yes, correct.
Just may have gone from 8 feet for BFE to 10 in some cases.
Yeah. So it's starting. You can now start to see some of the kind of natural changes that we need to think about to change our ordinance to react to new federal regulations. Okay, so you can't go beyond 44 feet. Waterfront overlay, same type of language.
Commercial, yeah.
But yeah, correct. Commercial waterfront overlay. So that's the area along the Trent. You have a maximum of 60 feet there.
Did you have some there on the Noose as well? Commercial?
We do
The
not
hotel?
have commercial. This
Yeah.
is residential overlay. right? Yeah.
Isn't that, but isn't that,
It's
Well,
commercial.
Commercial
there's
property.
commercial use, but
Yes.
the overlay is residential.
okay.
Correct. Okay. So let's go.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that met height requirements. That was a lot of fill too. Okay, so a little different in commercial. We get a maximum height of 60 feet. And this includes your appurtenances and whatnot. Can't go more than 66 feet. Occupancy, not intended place of occupancy sources, 60 feet. Above mean sea level, so we have that same mean sea level start. And 5%, okay, so that just gets into architecty stuff there. Let me read that again. It's not intended to set restrictions. Excluding. Can be displaced. Occupancy exposed. I have to think about that, but either way, I remember writing it 5 years ago, and there was a great reason for it. But either way, we're still working the same envelope, mean sea level to different heights for different types of structure, 60, then we get into the 75 and 66, based on rooftop appurtenances and living areas and occupancy and whatnot. I think that had to do with elevator shafts. That seem right, Raymond?
Yeah, I think so. If it's, depending on if it has an elevator penthouse or not.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an appurtenance.
Would that be appurtenance?
That's what I would call it.
I think that's where we broke that out though, but anyways. All right. Commercial waterfront overlay, measuring height from mean sea level up to 60 feet and give or take some for other stuff. Residential, mean sea level to 44 feet. And then construction is base flood elevation, which is your number you get on the map when you look at FEMA, plus 2 feet.
Freeboard, right?
2 feet of freeboard, correct. And that's where your first floor, finished floor elevation has to be at.
Yeah, that's the lowest it can be.
It's the lowest it can be, correct.
Because we have also added new language about electrical and mechanical distributions also have to be above that freeboard.
Now, that has to be above freeboard.
That is in our ordinance
Like a
now,
flood
so
ordinance.
you could potentially be
Probably
higher than
2.5,
that.
3 feet,
That's
probably,
right.
just to make it
But
work.
that's the minimum.
Yep, that's correct. Okay, so now, we think we have it taken care of. We have another layer of rules and regulations called an overlay that lays over this area here, which has its own set of language. It has its own language on height, which is probably not as specific as it should be, considering the specificity of the other stuff. So we have the residential waterfront overlay that deals with height in a very, Riverstation mixed use overlay that deals with height in less certain terms and uses stories and a relational kind of height to the downtown of that we have, that we have in New York. So we have building types, talking about stores, 2 to 3 stories, which is difficult.
It depends on ceiling height.
You got that right. Civic buildings, same deal. Building height varies and is dependent on site and spatial relationships. Okay, that's for civic buildings. So civic buildings may or may not have any kind of height requirements specifically. Live-work units, mixed-use kind of things, essentially. 2 to 3 stories again. Townhomes, regular we get 3 stories for townhomes. For detached, we have 2.5 stories, which, okay. Again, not the best way to write, code. So, let's go a little bit back to where we have the biggest problem. And as you can guess, it's right here. in this general vicinity, which is in the Riverstation Overlay, which half of it is in the residential waterfront overlay. All of it is in the historic district. The other half is not in the residential waterfront overlay. So here, you are measuring height totally different than here. Here creates a much taller building, and the way the rules are now, you probably have 1 stories here. Same development, no real difference in look, feel, anything, besides the fact that there's a line going down the middle that cuts it in half. So those are the types of things that we need to look at to make some recommendations to the board to kind of bring this all together. There's, kind of anything, there's discussion on, do we stop the waterfront, the residential waterfront overlay? Let's kind of leave this section out. We need to address the base flood elevation changes. As a side note, also need to add some language about elevations. So after Florence came through, we had a handful of homes that were, I wouldn't say required to be elevated, but people elevated them, and then to do it right, they had to get their buildings up higher to get them out of the floodplain, because why would you spend all that money to get half out of the floodplain? So we made a policy decision to allow them to be elevated, in which they then exceeded the height of the waterfront overlay districts. I could think of 2 or 3 off the top of my head. Not saying that it was bad, but it's not. There's no rules that address that specific situation, and a lot went into that decision. In that, these are historic homes, and do we want to keep subjecting them to flooding and hurricanes? Really, you run the risk of getting demolished, really going into a dilapidated condition. So those types of things. So we allowed them to go up higher just to save the structures, because they're in the historic district, and that's kind of what the charge of the historic district is.
So were those grandfathered in those?
They're nothing.
Nothing. They were just approved.
They were approved.
Okay.
They were approved after Florence, and there's no language that addresses them. There is language in the code that allows existing nonconformities, when the code was created, to not be treated. I guess we're getting into land use law a little bit. Not be treated as a nonconformity, or just treated as is. So if you're not treated as a nonconformity, you can still work and do changes to your structure and not have to meet the new rules. So there was language in the code when all these waterfront overlays were passed that said that they're not going to be treated as non-conforming uses. They're going to be just like a regular conforming home, and they can exist in perpetuity and do all the work they need to do to the home, add additions and whatnot, things like that.
So what did that raise their base floor elevation to?
Well, it's really site specific, but they all went above the regulatory, so they're up 3. I mean, they could have been on the ground. Some of them went up 5 feet. Look at the one right across from the hotel. That one went up, I think. That might have been the one where we put up our finger and said, "That's too high."
Park a car under that one.
Yeah, and I think that's what they wanted to do. But again, that was at grade. So I mean, it was a 5. Yeah, they did go up higher, if I remember correctly. But
Well, I think I know what you're talking about. Grade over there is roughly, finished grade is anywhere from 4 to 6 feet.
I was thinking that too. I
above
was
mean
thinking
sea
about
level.
6. Yeah.
So to get you
So you're
above,
10.
to get you up to 10,
6,
you're really
7
talking
feet.
about going up another, if you're at 6 feet, you're talking about going up another 4 plus another 2
Plus 2,
3 boards,
correct,
so another
yeah.
6 feet.
Yeah.
All right, so I've got a question for you.
Yep.
So, and I realize this is a informational session, discussion session. Are you contemplating changing both the way we measure and some heights in particular areas?
Not the way we measured, wasn't the
Okay, so
direction.
you're thinking the way we measure is okay. All right.
Unless, I mean, I'm not saying
Yeah.
you have a better way or not. I'm saying that I went through this 5 years ago. And
Yeah.
it took a long time to
Sure.
measure height.
I guess
In a lot of meetings.
and I think some of the mean sea level, measuring from mean sea level, I think some of that might have actually, I might have weighed in on that. You know,
Yeah.
that's a way we can measure something that's absolute, because mean sea level is mean sea level,
Yeah,
you know, rather than saying measuring from grade.
yeah.
I'm wondering if, because we've got all of this base flood elevation business tossed into play, now maybe more so than before, if we establish some maximum heights based on the base flood elevation rather than mean sea level. I mean, you just do some math at that point and come up with a delta. You take your base flood, you could wind up at the same place.
Yep.
Just to try to normalize the language where you don't have three different standards that we're talking about. I'm just a thought. And then that way you're always in those areas, because all of these overlays all have base flood elevations. They're all in the A zone.
Every one of them, yeah.
So if you deal with that, you deal with your maximum height as it relates to base flood elevation as opposed to mean sea level. Again, you can still come to the same place, Suppose the only caveat or problem that could create, because we have three different base flood elevations within our zone AE, we have 8, 9, and 10, is if that could, I guess that could potentially, that could create a 2-foot dead zone between,
Between structures.
It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Well, I mean, as you were talking, I had to search my memory banks of all the height stuff we did in the past, and that was that was a compromise. With the groups that we were working with to keep the mean high water.
Mean sea level. I mean, again, that's a mean sea level never, it does change.
Changes slowly.
It changes slowly.
But it'd be universal as opposed to grade would be changing all over.
Well, grade is,
Grade doesn't mean anything
you can
to us.
control grade. You
Yeah,
can't control mean sea level. So
Yeah.
grade is,
The mean sea level is fixed.
it is.
That's right, that's what I fix it to be.
Wouldn't it just be easier to base everything on mean sea level? And you get a mark somewhere in the town, what?
I mean, the important thing is the top end, where you start on the bottom.
I guess it really doesn't matter where you start if
Yeah.
you're trying to hit if you're trying to limit height or control height, maybe is a better way to say it. It really doesn't matter where you start. It's all about making these numbers work with where you start to get you where you want to be. And so if we're measuring everything from the same place, then what that would likely mean is all the numbers in the chart may change to still maintain that line that we're trying to maintain.
How much topography changes do we have in this area? I mean, are there
Couple
spots
feet.
Yeah,
everything's within a few feet? It's
Yeah,
not-
everything's within a couple of feet.
Yeah.
So we have no hills that we don't see whether the buildings have any significance.
Not this black
Interesting.
man.
We don't have a hill in New Bern, do we?
No.
Well, we do have
Yeah,
some.
North Hills.
Because it's called North.
None of these, nothing in these zones.
Nothing on this PowerPoint.
So, I mean, we're tasked with looking at the issues with the Riverstation overlay. Tighten up that language on what height is.
Yeah.
And looking at this area here is kind of the terminus of the Riverstation overlay as it kind of overlaps into the residential overlay, height overlay, and how this all interacts. This is pretty substantial difference right here. It doesn't make sense to keep it in, to remove it. This is all new construction here. The Historic Preservation Commission actually has a new amendment to the Historic Preservation Ordinance that incorporates this area. Well, it's been in it, but it actually creates another type of development type for this area specifically, because it's small lots in this new development, we essentially have two development types in our historic districts. We have kind of an urban and a non-urban, I forget the name of them, loose weed, dense weed.
Yeah, we talked about that last week.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now there's a third one coming in, that's right, because we did talk about last week, so, and that's to address this area here,
Yeah.
specifically.
So I guess really what it boils down to is that the R6 that we're looking at, particular down by Riverstation, is on the residential waterfront overlay side, we're maxed out at 44 feet
Right here.
as measured from mean sea level.
Correct.
On the opposite side of that, we're at 50 feet as measured from
From base
the
flood.
regulatory flood
Plus 2.
protection. Well, the regulatory is the 2, so
That's
maybe
right.
base flood plus 2. So
Yeah,
there, I think our base flood elevation is 8 feet, I
Yeah.
think. Could be 9, but I think it's 8, so you're 10. So, I mean, you could potentially have a building height there of
60 feet. Yeah.
60 feet.
And this one's
And
20.
there, you're down, well, there, you're at 44 max.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
44.
you're
Well, that'd
essentially
be
a
okay.
15-foot difference.
Yeah,
Because the ones that would be on the water side would be shorter than the opposite ones, so they could have a view over the house.
that's true.
Well, yeah, right, except that even the ones that are limited to 44, they still
Won't be able to
have,
get
well, they
the
still have the
seven.
limitation of the base flood or the regulatory flood protection elevation. So even though they have to be shorter, they still lose that 10 feet on the bottom. So, you know.
Hence, they won't have enough house there to sell.
Well, potentially.
Yeah.
So what, why don't you just compromise and make them, instead of 44, why don't you just make them all 50 and call it a day? That makes up the difference, the commercial stays the same. I think
Well-
a little bit.
Except that how you measure. So the difference is in the overlay, that's a max from mean sea level. And when you get out of the overlay, that's a max from regulatory flood protection elevation. So it's a 10-foot, it could be as much as 12, depending on what your base flood elevation is. That's a delta of 10 to 12 feet, just because of how you measure.
Which is essentially about a story.
Yeah, thereabouts.
But you
Certainly,
have to
certainly a
find what
residential. That's
story
not quite,
is.
it's not quite a commercial story, but certainly a residential story.
And I'm thinking a half story, what you were talking about, that's like basically an attic space?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know,
With
right?
pitch.
You know a half story when you see it. That's one of those things. I mean,
Yeah, well, I mean, a half story in a house occurs under a roof.
Under a roof, that's right, yeah,
Look like with dormers and whatnot.
correct.
Yeah, potentially.
So Jeff, like I mean, roughly how many houses are you talking about that, in these three?
Can't be that much.
What do we, in this area here?
Yeah, that kind of fall in all three of the.
Oh, it's just this chunk here, so
It's just one development.
26, 20 or so, maybe, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm not sure we want to be touching these overall height
Yeah.
beyond any changes, any regulatory changes that have been pushed upon us by the federal government. So, to go up to 50, I think we're opening up a can of worms of, I'm not sure you want to be a part of, because I have been there.
Yeah, it gets sticky.
Yeah. So that number was, 18 months in the works of meetings and subcommittees and neighborhood meetings and a whole bunch of things. So,
But Ellen,
Uh-huh.
you gotta take into, we evolve because of what goes around us. So just because it was always this way before, we can't always stay under those old rules. Because if you do that, you don't move forward.
well, that's what the P&Z is for.
And
I
all
think
these
you're gonna-
rules be subject to variance too, wouldn't they?
Variance is a something we don't really.
You would rather not have it.
Well, yeah, I mean, variances are weird, so I would say no. You almost can never get a variance from height.
Right.
There's a lot of other things that go into it, but variances are for those situations where you're on a triangle lot and it's half the size that it should be, and you just can't physically, you didn't make the problem yourself, and you've had the property forever and you want to build something on it, then we go in and ask for variances. Variances aren't for I can't build what I want to do on my lot, so I need to change the rules to do what I want to do. Variances are more towards, it's almost a necessity to even make a viable structure. Here in Newbern. Now, I've been in places where variances where I don't want to meet the rules and let me just ask for variance. So again, do we understand
The problem,
the issue?
yes.
Go back, talk to some people. Marge, you're in the business, you're doing it all day. You know, get some ideas, we'll come back and we'll talk some policy. I'll lay out the specific questions that we should be asking ourselves,
Okay.
and we'll start building some kind of policy recommendations.
Okay.
Do you have any
And,
questions?
yeah, and Sonny, did you guys follow along?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
I have a question that's just a curiosity question.
Sure.
Why were the chimney not included in the height?
Because it's an appurtenance,
Correct. Yeah.
because
So
it can change.
There, were-
Yeah.
the previous language from 5 or 6, 7 years ago, what it was, had a lot of archaic language of like cornices.
Yeah.
Not very many things that are buildings now, houses or otherwise, have cornices. And so the thought process was to normalize the language and get to something that everybody could understand, because before it talked about if you had a sloped roof or a flat roof.
That's
and
right.
so
Different ways of measuring height.
the discussion and what drove the ultimate change was to try to get to something that anybody can look and say, well, that's what we're measuring to. And so if you say total height, excluding chimneys, appurtenances, parapets, those sort of things, if you get total height, anybody can go out there and look and say, okay, that's where we're measuring. And so that was the problem that the city was running into, is that there were any number of ways you can interpret height previously,
Yes.
and it just created constant problems. And our ordinance was, the language in our ordinance was different than a lot of other municipalities, and it created problems
Yeah,
for
well, I
us.
didn't know how to measure height.
Right. Nobody knew how to measure it. You could take any building
Yeah.
and two people could measure it two different ways.
That's right.
And so I think, you know, we did a good job in eliminating that.
Yeah.
And so we just have some overlays and zones and.
Yeah, we got
we
flood, we got
some
new flood
overlapping-
rules, and we got some overlapping flood rules, and we got some really kind of vague language in our Riverstation overlay
Yeah.
language. So those are the big three that we can take apart. So with that, Mr. Chair, I think the,
So we've concluded the introduction of this.
we have concluded the introduction. Okay. Unless anyone has any more questions. But if you have any questions, you want to shoot me an email, say, hey, I was thinking of this, or why not, please feel free. And we'll go from there. And we'll dig in next month.
Right now, we're open for any members' comments. Does anybody wish to bring up anything? I would just like to know myself, Jeff, how is the applications for building permits in the West New Bern, and is there any developments again in the redevelopment zone?
So West New Bern, yes, they are moving now quickly again with, was it USA Home? Who, the big home builder?
DR Horton.
DR Horton. So that's moving forward. They're catching the hot market. We are in an extremely hot market, as
That's
Mark
good
and
news.
Pat probably know. I got my house appraised the other day. Yes, we are in a good market.
It will sell quickly.
I know.
You might not be able to find nothing.
I don't know where else to go.
That's
You'll be
good.
happy
We can
when your
sell it.
taxes come.
Yeah.
My neighbors.
Yeah, so.
You'll be homeless.
Anyways, so yeah, they're moving forward with that and closing that deal. I believe they're gonna stay, they're beginning construction, I wanna say second quarter of next year. There's also, y'all will be seeing a final plat for the New Bern Aesthetic Center that's gonna be coming in there also. Xanis and some holistic wellness deal. It's a pretty big building. It's going to be right on 70. So that, I just approved their final kind of draft last week. So they'll be formulating a final submittal that you all will see. So that's moving forward. Redevelopment Commission, we are organizing, big news, if anyone's ever driven through Duffield, you'll see that there's thousands of junk cars all over the place, and abandoned and non-operable vehicles. We're partnering up with Foss Recycling and they will come down and take away one or take away 1,000 free of charge for anybody. So we're in the process of getting kind of the media package together for that to get the word out into the community. There's some information that they do require. It's not just show up and take this car away. But so we're working on that.
Everybody be bringing in their cars.
Because it might be their neighbors. I mean, I don't know.
No more yard art.
Yeah. So that's exciting. We're in the process of looking at purchasing. I'm going to make an offer on a couple of homes in the Long Wharf area on behalf of the Redevelopment Commission, so they can begin their rehab and rental program, and organizing the next neighborhood cleanup in that same area, Walt Bellamy, Long Wharf area. So Public Works goes in, spends the day with their entire crew out there, cutting, cleaning sidewalks, cutting back limbs, picking up trash, mowing yards and lots and right-of-ways and things like that. So those are the things that we're working on now. Organizing kind of a health initiative. We're partnering up with a lot of local health providers and universities to bring kind of a series, a lecture series to the community on health and wellness, dealing with COVID, stress, all those other things, as well as just overall wellness. So got a meeting on that tomorrow. So we're all moving forward. Very holistic, comprehensive kind of redevelopment plan, from the people to the structures to the streets, to the abandoned vehicles.
That's wonderful news.
Yeah.
So that conducts any
Michael?
new, yes, Ann?
Good luck getting those vehicles to go.
Yeah, we're working on it. I was surprised Foss was, they were ecstatic. They said, yes, sir.
They want the,
They'll be here. They want the scrap.
They want the scrap. At this point, we seem to be at the end of the business, I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. That concludes the meeting. Thank you.